Hi, this is Tempter Podcast, where we discuss embedded Linux, IoT development, and anything else we might find interesting. Your hosts are Kim and Cliff Break today. And hi, Cliff, how are you doing?
Real good. How about you, Kim?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. So
Good.
today we are going to have a very interesting topic, and everybody talks about web technologies, and they have had different experiences. Today we would talk about Elm, and we like computer languages and infrastructures quite a lot, and we found using them in various situations. So today, our experiences and our readings of what Elm can offer, and how Elm was used in real life products. So we'll go over that. And Cliff, what's Elm?
Yeah, Elm is a programming language for the front end, or in other words, it compiles to run in a browser. So Elm is a functional language. It's a pure functional language, similar to Haskell in some ways, but much simpler. And then it compiles to JavaScript. And then you would load this JavaScript bundle from an HTML page, and it would handle a lot of the logic and actually do the rendering as well. You would use Elm to handle your logic and also to render HTML elements in your web page. So that's what it is in a nutshell. It's very similar to React from Facebook, if you're familiar with that project. So it's kind of a alternative to React, if you will.
Right. So I think you mentioned React, and I believe there are other options out there that could be used as well. So why would one use Elm?
Yeah, so I've tried several things over the years, and to start with, I'm not a front end expert. I'm looking for solutions that are simple, and I spend a lot of time in system software, some time in hardware, a lot of time writing applications. So I don't really have the bandwidth to be a front end expert. So I'm always looking for something that's simple, and that I can get my job done with the least amount of pain. So years ago, pretty much it was just like jQuery, and that was kind of the bleeding edge. And then Angular came out, and that was kind of the new thing. And then React came out, and that was a little different, and I liked it a little better than Angular. But as these progressive technologies came out, they also brought a number of problems with them. Just the fact with JavaScript, it's a dynamically typed language, and it's pretty easy to get into a situation where you have undefined variables or things that aren't populated, and it ends up your program crashes in the browser. And typically the symptom of this is just that it quits working, and for the user that's very bad. You have your program and it just quits responding. And there's ways to handle that, but it all gets very complex. So Elm takes a different approach. You write your program in a pure functional language that compiles down to JavaScript. So if you can get the thing to compile, one of the things they say about Elm is no runtime exceptions. And the idea is if you can get your program to compile, the compiler does a lot of checking and pretty much guarantees that your program won't have runtime exceptions in the browser. So there's probably several things we should talk about, but that's kind of the main benefit of Elm that they sell. But a couple other dimensions to Elm are just its simplicity and also efficiency. But so we can pull those topics in at any time. But
so speaking of why we should use Elm, and you described some of the use cases that in my mind fit very well into, say, a front-end programming language. And so, can we kind of say, Elm is advantageous in a front end programming, and it is not useful, say, for doing something on the middleware or other areas? Or so, what I'm trying to ask is why shouldn't we use Elm?
Yeah, so Elm is definitely targeted to the front end. The authors have made no significant attempt to make it usable for back-end programs. And a lot of people have asked for that, and some other people have tried it. And there are ways to wrap Elm in Node.js, and people have done that to run some tools, like some of the tooling. They would write it in Elm and then wrap it in Node.js so that you can write your tooling in Elm. But as far as like a full stack solution where you can use Elm on the back end and front end, it doesn't really exist. So Elm is really targeted to the front end, and they've put all their effort into making sure that works really well. And I think it's worked out well. It's hard to do everything well, and Elm does front end programming very well. A functional language seems to be a good fit for the front end, where you have a lot of complex structure and a lot of complex state, and it seems to be a different type of problem than back end programming. So it's definitely something I would recommend for the front end, but not necessarily for anything else right now.
So you mentioned about functional programming languages, and I think it's a new paradigm for, it's a new way of basically thinking your algorithms. So it's not only a syntax, so to speak, but it's also how you divide the problem down into a solvable units and how you approach solving the problem. So I think that Elm is definitely following the functional language paradigm as well. So could you talk about the functional language aspects of Elm and how it is helpful for the Elm and the area it is targeting?
Yeah, functional programming is kind of interesting. This has been my first real experience with functional programming. And what we mean by functional programming is it's different than procedural programming. It's different than C programming. So there is a distinction there. And functional programming, some of the aspects of Elm anyway, I don't have experience in other languages, but all data is immutable. So you can't ever modify the value of a variable. You can only pass it to a function and create a new variable. So that takes a little bit of getting used to. And some other features of functional programming that are a little different. There's very advanced techniques for combining functions. So you can partially specify a function, and that creates a function that you can then, I think they call it querying. But anyway, I'm no expert at all this. I just know enough to use it. But in the end, what functional programming gives you is a very controlled way to write your programs. And it's a very strict way, but it also kind of guides you into doing things correctly. And it makes your programs easier to reason about in the end.
Right.
So it takes a lot more work to kind of get your program written, especially before you have some experience. But once you get there, the result is very maintainable, very clean. And I've seen several quotes, where people say that once they started functional programming, programming was fun again. So it's definitely a different paradigm. It has a pretty good learning curve, but I think it's worth learning. A lot of people have recommended that programmers learn a functional language, and I believe Elm is probably the simplest functional language you can find, and it's a good way to learn functional programming.
That's interesting. So what I see is I completely concur with you here. And in my mind, functional programming paradigm is also how a human brain thinks.
Okay.
So
interesting.
I think we don't think in loops, right? So we basically, the fact that data is what is being your core, is immutable, you have properties on data, and then functions are applied onto it, is completely reversal of, say, the other programming models where you pass data to the functions, right? And then functions operate on it and data changes on the other side. In this case, you apply functions to data. So what happens is, if you think in that way, then, our brains perform much better in creating the solutions rather than, as I was saying earlier, thinking in loops, for example, because that's not how our brains are wired. We think abstract thinking is more about how it is at an abstract point, and that is where our human brains excel. And I think that it really helps that if there is something like a functional language to solve that in and represent that into to the computer. So I think Elm definitely that the kind of like catches my interest from functional aspects of feature implementations. And what features do you think are compelling that you used so far? In a moment, we'll come down to the projects where it was used. But if you were to kind of recommend it to someone, what were like those perhaps one or two features that caught your eye and you really enjoyed learning them and using them?
Yeah. So one thing I've been using is a package named elm-ui for Elm, and this is a phenomenal package. It's really amazing, and it kind of replaces HTML and CSS with some new constructs that are very flexible for laying out and styling your content. And this sounds pretty scary. I mean, it's generally a bad idea to stray from well-established patterns, but in this case, it really works well. And if again, I'm not a front-end expert, and CSS is pretty hard if you've ever played with that. So elm-ui, it's very powerful, but yet it's very simple. And the features of Elm, where you can write code and it always does what it should, and you can refactor it, and you can handle very complex UIs. And then with elm-ui, which gives you a toolkit to actually lay out your content and style it in a sane way, it's been really nice. I can't say enough good things about the combination of those two.
All right. So I think that's really a cool tip. So there is, SPA, the single page apps, which is quite prevalent these days, or at least, is quite used. And I know that you have talked about it on several occasions. So why do we want to use single page apps, and what are the upsides and downsides of single page apps?
That's an excellent question and a hard one to answer, because some of the smartest people in the industry and well known really recommend against single page apps. Really, think that we should continue to render pages on the server and then just sprinkle in a little JavaScript where needed, instead of downloading the entire app as one bundle. So actually, to back up a little bit, a single page app is kind of a standalone front end application that just makes API calls to the back end to get content. But the entire app is actually bundled and downloaded when you load the page. So one of the objections to that is when you download the entire app, you're downloading every page in one bundle.
Right.
And that could be a little bit scary, and that's a lot of data. But in practice, what I found is Elm is so efficient, and it compiles down to such a small bundle that you can write lots and lots of front end pages and logic, and you're still under a couple 100K or something. So unless you're designing a huge site, maybe like an enterprise something or other, that has 500 different pages, this probably isn't a concern for the average project where the whole thing might have a dozen pages or something. So then as you think about a single page app, if you look at a traditional templating language where you have HTML and then sprinkled in that you might have PHP or some other templating code, specifying for loops is really kind of clunky, and the programming part of a templating language is really kind of a second class citizen. And that's kind of where React was revolutionary. It kind of put the HTML in the JavaScript instead of the JavaScript in the HTML. It kind of reversed that paradigm. So then it became more natural to treat your web page more as a program rather than a template with a little bit of logic. And
Like
then
a
Elm
form.
takes,
Yeah.
yeah, right. So then Elm takes it even further in that there's really no difference between your code that your logic code and then your code that actually creates visual elements.
Hmm.
It's all just kind of the same thing. And I believe it's just a lot more natural and powerful experience to actually be writing all that in one unified program versus trying to mix all these technologies like HTML and CSS and JavaScript all together. It's when you can do everything in one language and it's clean like that. It's especially for really complex pages, with lots of logic, and that typically is the type of thing I'm doing.
Hmm.
So in that case, an SPA and the Elm experience seems to make sense.
I see. Oh, that's very convincing argument there, and I really like it. And so let's move on to, like, I know we have used Elm in Simple IoT project, and especially for the front end part, and not only the open source project that we have there, but you have deployed it in several customer scenarios in real life products. So, what would you like our listeners to know about use of Elm in Simple IoT project?
So we chose Elm in the Simple IoT project, and it's worked out really well. I definitely think it's an excellent fit. But with Simple IoT, we have a fairly complex user interface where we have a lot of structured data. So the way the data is structured in Simple IoT, it's a tree of nodes. And these nodes can all have properties that can be updating in real time. And the most recent work we've been doing is integrating Modbus functionality. So if you have a Modbus I/O node, and depending on, if it's a coil or a register or a discrete input, as you make those selections, then a bunch of other things change. So it's a very dynamic thing. And as you make selections, things are changing. So this is all worked out very well with Elm. I think it's been good.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to talk about, one or two points of your experience using Elm, what would that be? Especially in simple IoT context.
Yeah. I guess the no runtime exceptions has really held up. I can't.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a few bugs in my code, but once you get it to compile, it generally just works, and that's a really refreshing experience to not be spending lots and lots of time in the Elm cons or the JavaScript console in the browser,
Mm-hmm.
adding print statements. And the reliability has really held up. But I would say the other thing that really impresses me with Elm is the tooling.
Mm-hmm.
JavaScript tooling is quite a mess with npm and just hundreds and hundreds of packages that typically get pulled into a project.
Mm-hmm.
And Elm, there's a lot of packages too, but the Elm compiler is basically all that you need. It handles the packaging, the compiling,
Mm-hmm.
and about everything. So it's a very simple experience to build an Elm project versus a traditional JavaScript project where you have Webpack or Parcel or some other very complex tooling. And the other thing, Elm builds extremely fast. So, you make a change and, in way less than a second, the whole thing's rebuilt and ready to test.
Wow.
Where a JavaScript project, the bundlers are pretty smart about only compiling what changes, but if you have to build the entire thing, it can take minutes. It's like a big C++ project or something.
I see. Um,
So
well, that's pretty neat. So as you know, like front end programming, JavaScript is pretty much the name in the town. So does Elm interact with JavaScript projects? And if it does, then could you explain a little bit how it does that?
yeah, so Elm has some restrictions. You can't really like call JavaScript directly from Elm. The only thing you can do is send data through ports. And this has kind of been a point of contention for a lot of people. They think Elm should interact easier and be able to call JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a lot of JavaScript libraries that you want to use in your project, Elm may not be the best choice. It's probably a better choice if you want to kind of develop a project that can be done mostly in Elm. But if you already have a JavaScript project, it's relatively easy to just replace parts of it with Elm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've been doing with one of our customer projects that's gotten pretty large, and we're starting to add some really complex UI elements regarding notifications and scheduling and all that. So we've been writing those in Elm. And Elm has pretty good support for creating a component that you could then embed in like a React project.
I see.
So that's working well.
So I'm sure that before jumping onto using Elm, you must have done some comparison, or or looked at other frameworks out there, which basically are used to solve similar problems. So could you talk about some of that experience as to how Elm compares to existing or maybe future technologies, or any of those?
Yeah, I've done several things over the years, but just recently I did a little looking at there's a project out there called the Real World app,
Mm-hmm.
and it's basically a back end that a bunch of people are writing different front ends for, and it's a way to evaluate front end frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
So the Real World, it's like a little blog type app where you can write articles.
Mm-hmm.
All the different frameworks out there, Elm, React. There's a new one out there called Seed-RS, which is a Rust framework,
Mm-hmm.
and Vue, and all the ones that there's been implementations written. So it's a nice way to compare different options. So one thing we did recently was compare Elm Seed-RS, which I believe compiles to WASM, and then React Redux, and then just looked at the program size that was being downloaded into the browser to get an idea of how big of a blob of program was required with each one of these solutions. So the Elm came in at 90 kilobytes, the React Redux came in at 1 megabyte, and the Seed-RS solution came in at 1.27 megabytes. So from there, you can see that Elm is like a tenth of the size of React Redux, which really surprised me. But again, that goes back to what I said earlier. The bundle size of an Elm program, you have to write a lot of code to really make that big enough to be a concern.
Wow, that's really telling data there.
Yeah. So I will post this to our community discourse forum if anyone wants to go look at details and add a link to the show notes.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really interesting data point, and I think I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would like to take a look at it and maybe design their own front ends and see how they are pitted against each other. So that's really neat information in there.
Yeah, it is.
So what is I know that WASM is talked about technology in the industry today, and you also played with it with Seed.rs. How do you see is WASM the universal front end solution that world is moving towards, or where do you see it is right now in terms of the technologies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because there's definitely a lot going on there, and I really like Rust. I don't have experience with it yet, but it seems like a great idea, and compiling to something a little lower level than JavaScript to me seems like a good idea. More of like an assembly for the web versus a higher level language like JavaScript. So I was frankly very surprised that the Seed-RS, which compiles to WASM, came in with such a large bundle. But the concept seems really interesting and seems like a good idea, but it may just be early in the implementation such that it's not quite as efficient as some other solutions. I know Elm has very aggressive dead code elimination, and they can do that because it's a statically compiled typed language where the compiler knows everything about what's going on,
Hmm.
and maybe eventually the WASM solutions will have better dead code elimination, and seems like it could potentially be more efficient. But anyway, you're in the compiler world. What do you see with WASM and all that?
Yeah, I think WASM, as you said, it is promising, but I think there is a lot of work that is ongoing, and I'm hoping that'll bear some fruits for the community in long run. But I think it's early to say, and definitely, the fact that it is using technologies there where it will open up the programming space to more than one languages, and can like potentially become a de facto standard for the web. That will be really really good for the industry in general, but remains to be seen. I'm as skeptical as you when it comes to when it would be of that scale. Although if you look at in LLVM and in the areas where WASM backends are being implemented, things are changing very rapidly, and they're implementing much more optimized code, and I think it will eventually improve quite a bit. But until then, I think we'll always have many other technologies complementing the space.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So I think
Yeah.
what I will say is, so if Elm is for front end, then I guess Go is for the back end.
Well, I find them very complementary solutions. It's currently my preferred stack for solving problems,
All right.
and there's more to a language than just the programming paradigm. Functional, procedural, object oriented. The values around the language, the tooling, and as I mentioned forward, it seems like functional programming is a good fit for the front end, and Go seems to be a plenty adequate fit for the back end right now. So,
Mm-hmm.
if something comes along and it has the same values as Go, where the tooling is good, it's efficient, builds fast, it's reliable, we may eventually look at something different there. But it's nice to have options. We're always looking at what's coming out, and
Yeah.
things are always changing. So.
Yeah. So I think back end Go, front end Elm. What more do we need? But on the lighter note, so every community of that, they have a certain stamp of their own, so to speak. So, for example, if you go to the Go language community, it is more about simplicity. If you go talk about Rust, it's more about correctness, and similarly others, they have their own little nuances. So, what do you see that in Elm in this regard?
Yeah, Elm is kind of a nice blend of simplicity
Hmm.
and efficiency and correctness too. It really seems to have hit a lot of important aspects without really compromising too much. Oftentimes, if you want one, you have to give on the other, but it seems like it has struck a very good balance. One thing I will say about Elm, I'm sure it's one of the easiest functional languages to learn, but it's still not like as simple as Go. It's definitely, simple doesn't necessarily mean easy,
Right.
but it's worth the effort to learn, I believe.
Hmm. All right. So I think before I let you go, Cliff, any resources, any books, or any blogs that you would like listeners to pay attention to when it comes to Elm?
Well, there's a Elm Weekly newsletter that's pretty good. I learn a lot from that.
Hmm.
The folks on the Elm Slack are extremely helpful. So if you want to learn Elm and you need help, there's always people there willing to help.
Hmm.
And then there's a project called elm-spa.dev, and it's kind of a tool to generate a skeleton for a Elm SPA application. And I've learned a lot of Elm best practices from that, so I highly recommend that for scaffolding your Elm app. And we'll put links to all these in the show notes. So
Right, right. Yeah, thank you, Cliff, and I hope you found this you find this useful, and please let us know if you want to know more about or you want more episodes on this kind of content. And thank you very much. Thank you, Cliff.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.